Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Bill Whittle, and it's good to be here on the 11th of July. Shut up, you idiot. Hope everybody is doing well. Let's see, we could probably use a little more light in here, I guess. Oh, it's probably the white shirt reflecting all of this jazz back. In any event, hope everybody's doing well. This is a cat t-shirt, yes. Here it comes already. So, I am really happy to be here. Happy to be able to do. Oh, it's 7-Eleven. Well pointed out, Eric. Blake points out it's 7-Eleven. And before I forget, I'd just like to congratulate Sarge, who is retiring tomorrow. Longtime Stratosphere Lounge associate, and I don't know how long you've been doing what you're doing, but I'd be willing to bet it's a while. And if I know my people, and I do, you certainly deserve the rest, and congratulations on a long career. Now you can start to really have fun and do some good things. Do you ever find yourself just like suddenly really thirsty, and I'm a bit thirsty. You take a drink and then you can't stop drinking. Not me neither. All right, so let me see. I'm really in love with this. Something's a little funny, but we'll worry about that later. You want a little more gain? Gain. Oy. Ooh. Okay. Anyway, congratulations, Sarge. I can't wait to hear about what you're going to do in the Unreal world, and it's been just such a pleasure having you here, and looking forward to having you here for a long, long time. Well, finally, I get to talk about a little bit about the Apollo stuff since it's actually been released. And I suppose it's possible that there are some people who have not seen the Apollo trailer. I find it virtually impossible to believe it. Nevertheless, I do. And I was going to preset this, but I can't, so I'm going to drag it into the window. It's just a minute long because I do want to talk about this a little bit. We get a chance to riff around a little bit before we get to work. So let's see if this will do what it's supposed to do here.
Apollo 11, this is Houston.
Welcome to Apollo 11 Mission Control. What's left of it anyway? The space race. 12 years of open warfare between two superpowers.
The United States and the Soviet Union.
We used our best missiles, our best pilots.
Scientists and engineers.
We employed aircraft carriers, radar stations, all the military hardware we had to defeat our ideological nemesis, when each team had over 20,000 nuclear warheads apiece. The space race was the defining act of the second half of the 20th century.
Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement.
50 years ago, men from planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. You owe it to yourself and to history to experience the space age from the inside and see how it took hundreds of small steps to get to that one giant leap. I'm Bill Whittle, and this is What We Saw. I am quite fond of that. By the way, just out of memory, for all the years we used Ustream, trying to set that clip up on Ustream would have taken better part of 15 minutes of dead air. I just pull it into the window, it plays, and then the second it's over, it comes back to the live picture. Thank you, Foghorn, for recommending this awesome software, OBS, streaming software. It's great. So anyway, I want to, during the, we usually take just 1 or 2 minutes, which end up taking about an hour, on some subject, and I want to talk Apollo, and not just Apollo. My point is, I get to finally talk about the project, which I've not been able to really talk about much before. So let me tell you what it consists of. It's 4 segments, 3 segments of 1 hour, and then the final segment, the Apollo 11 and after segment, is almost 2 hours. So it's 5 hours of writing. I did the math. Generally speaking, there was some, I forget what the numbers were exactly, but your typical firewall is 12 or 1,300 words. This was 42,000 or something. and it came out to something like 39 firewalls worth of work. I had a chance to tell Jeremy Boring, who made me the offer on this, who I've been working with and who's been a good friend of mine since I met him back in 2008, early 2008. I got a chance to text him after I saw the rough cuts I saw the rough cut of all three except for part 4. When I finished with the rough cut of part 3, and the editors had added so much stuff, I'll make a reference to Apollo 7, and they'll find footage I'd never seen, or they'll insert the Apollo 7 team is now, it just news clips. It's unbelievable. And I got a chance to text Jeremy and say, I've been doing these videos for about 10 years now, since I started with the atomic bomb afterburner. And for that entire time, I've had to live under the weight of having the best thing I ever did be the first thing I ever did, and in another week, that's not going to be true anymore. It's just tremendous, tremendous. If I do say so myself, mostly because they put so much work into it. The set is mind-boggling. Let me get a still of the set. I'll just tell you something just real quick here. Here we go. It's not a great shot of the whole set, but it'll give you the vibe. Hey, look at that. Just comes right in. You've seen the set, and we've got just in back of me. There's a very, very good high-level museum quality Apollo moon suit replica, and then there's also very high quality Apollo control console. But you saw the room in the clip and everything, and I kind of came up with this whole backstory. Actually, come to think of it, I'd like to see if I can find one just real fast with a little more of the background. I guess I can show you guys a couple of behind-the-scenes shots here. I've probably shown them already. Here we go. Let's just have a look at this one. Hey, look at that. Hang on a second. This is working too. That would be you. Sorry about this. But there's a point I kind of want to make here for a change. You get this. You get the gist. There it is. That's most of it. Okay, so in the back there is the cool Apollo stuff. There's the suit and the Apollo consoles in the back, and it's flashing and stuff. And I actually couldn't help myself. I just started writing, like backstory for this, and the backstory basically is something like this. Let me just clear this off here. Delete that, yes. I love that picture. My wife took both of these. She's such a great photographer, and I'm very, very proud of all of those things. Come on, you can go away. Come back. Hello. Yes, I want to delete you. Goodbye. Okay, so here's the backstory. I just came up with this. I was sitting on the set waiting for the audio guys or something like that, and I looked around and I thought, okay, so probably not a lot of people know this on account of it not being true, but back during the Apollo program, actually brought it into place during the Gemini program. They had buried a backup control center deep inside a mountain. It wasn't Cheyenne Mountain, that would be too obvious. Let's just say a mountain, several miles deep inside a mountain. And what it was the backup for mission control if in the event of a nuclear attack during a mission. This would allow us at least to keep the basic telemetry together in order to get the guys home. So my dad took me down there to visit in 1969 because I was so deep into the whole space thing. And then there was some kind of an alarm, and I was down there for 50 years. So I just grabbed a suit off the rack, and I've kind of been down there for about 50 years, just kind of making sure that the equipment's still working and keeping it warm and all of that stuff. I just the idea that kind of Apollo fire is down there in a room. It's in a bomb shelter where where it belongs. It's in a bomb shelter. It's under a mountain. It's not gone, but it's sure not easy to find. But it's there when its time is going to come. I just absolutely love that idea. Just love it. And I have a very high hope that we'll be able to do more of these in the future. These in-depth history things, if we get a chance to. I'm not saying we will. A lot's going to depend on how well this does. But if we do, I really like this idea of doing 4 hours on one topic, and not a 4 1-hour podcasts. If we get a chance to do another one, and if I get to decide what it is, and if they agree with the selection, I think what I would do next is I would do a 4-part battle of Leyte Gulf, because Leyte Gulf was actually 4 different battles over the course of a day or two, and everybody knows about the carrier war in the Pacific, and people know about the submarine war in the Pacific, but nobody talks about the surface engagement war. And needless to say, Taffy 3 is a big story. That was the third of the 4 battles. The second one was called the Battle of Surigao Strait, where Japanese sent some obsolete battleships right down the throat of the American battle line and blew them out of the water, but it was just incredibly dramatic and cool. The Johnston. The Johnston and the Sammy B. and the Hogue as well. And I just want to have a chance to tell those stories. Yeah, Last of the Tin Can Sailors, I read it. It's what got me hooked on the whole thing. And then once I read Last of the Tin Can Sailors, I read everything else. I read everything else he wrote. I read everything else. Actually, Steve Green started me on it with the Fleet at Flood Tide. But we've talked about this before. I don't really want to talk about that right now. But that's what I would like to do in the future. But the thing about this Apollo thing that I'm most hole in the USS Hole in the Gambier Bay. The thing I'm most proud about, and the thing I think is going to make this what we saw thing actually do some business, is that because I knew the program so well, I didn't have to tell the stories of the missions the way that you would tell the stories of the missions if you didn't know the missions. That's kind of a hard thing to explain, really. But let's say you're a 30-year-old or 40-year-old producer, and I give you an assignment to do a special on the Apollo 11 moon landing. Well, you'll be able to do all the research, and you'll find out, well, Apollo 9 did this and Apollo 10 did that and stuff. But we don't talk much about that. At least that's not where the heart of the show is. I love the human interest stories. I love the fact that there was an actual mutiny on Apollo 7, and I don't mean like a trivial kind of ha-ha mutiny. Wally Schirra was experiencing incredible ear pain. First of all, they were up there for like 11 days, smelled like a sewer. But they just stopped doing things. Somebody wanted him to turn on the TV camera, and he says, "I'm the commander of this mission. I'm not turning it on until I think it's safe," and so on. So finally, they're getting ready to re-enter the atmosphere, and they tell them to put on their helmets, and Schirra says, "We're not wearing our helmets for re-entry." And Deke Slayton is like, Capcom is like, what? And Deke comes over, and he basically, on an open mic, is saying, "What do you mean you're not going to wear your helmets?" And Schirra says, "No, they don't have a visor. They're those Apollo bubble helmets. First helmets since maybe in the entire space program of all nations that didn't have a visor." And Schirra was worried that if he put that thing on during reentry, as the pressure increased, his eardrums would rupture. So he flat out refused to do it. And Slayton said, "Look, Wally, if you do this, you're going to have to answer for it." But he did it. And that ended up, it was Schirra's last flight. But Isley and Cunningham, who flew with him, never flew again. Because they were part of a crew that basically mutinied against, ground control. It wasn't Wally Schirra's finest moment. Wally Schirra's finest moment, I'm not going to go into all of these, obviously, but just give you a back idea of the kind of things that we talk about. When I mentioned this flight of Apollo 7, I said that wasn't Schirra's finest moment. And then I talk about what I think his finest moment was, which I mentioned in part 2 in some detail. Let's just give you a close idea of the kind of thing that we get to do on this show, on the What We Saw show. So we launch Ham, the steely-eyed astrochimp, and on a suborbital flight in a Mercury capsule on a redstone, and I forget the exact chronology. If Shepard had taken that flight, he would have been the first man in space. But since they sent the chimp, Yuri Gagarin went up, did a full orbit, a much tougher mission than anything that we were doing on the first of the first 2 Gemini flights. But Shepard would have been the first man in space, and then Gagarin flies just a couple weeks before Shepard. So Gagarin becomes the first man in space. Shepard becomes the first American in space. That's Freedom 7, the first Mercury flight. Liberty Bell 7, the second flight, suborbital flight on a Redstone rocket. Gus Grissom is the commander of Liberty Bell 7. They go up, they come down, into the water, kersplash. The capsule's righting itself. They're waiting for the helicopter. The explosive bolts on the hatch fire. The capsule begins to fill with water. Grissom escapes as the thing's going down. The helicopter puts a hook on it. And by the way, DFR, our friend DFRSS says the first human-made thing in space was 1942 German V-2 missile. In 1946, we put a camera on the top of a missile, and we got our first picture of outer space. By the way, again, these are the kind of things that I just packed the show full of. Anybody want to guess how many V2s they made during the war? If you'd asked me, I would have said maybe 150, something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood. They made 5,200 of them, and 2,500 people were killed, which means no fooling now. You had to fire 2 V2 rockets to kill 1 Englishman. So that's pretty amazing. Anyway, so back to this Schirra thing. So, sorry, Julius. So they try to save the capsule. The thing's filling full of water. This capsule's got all kinds of experimental data that they need. They really need that capsule back. But it's going under, and so the helicopter pilot decides rather than the capsule going to the bottom with the cable and the helicopter and Grissom, he releases the cable, and down she goes. Grissom is rescued, he nearly drowns. Now, if you've seen that scene in The Right Stuff, and I have, needless to say, several times, they don't actually show Gus blowing the bolts. They purposely leave it ambiguous. But the very last thing they say is that, first of all, Fred Ward is playing Gus like almost hysterical, trying to convince people that it was a mechanical failure, not just him screwing the pooch. So the very last thing they say in The Right Stuff is, well, what do you think? And these technical guys are saying, so they say something like, we've flown explosive bolts on hundreds of pieces of software for thousands and thousands of hours of flight time, and we've never, ever had a problem with them before. That's where they left it. But it was clear to me watching the show, and clear, I think, to anybody watching the show, that Gus had panicked and blown the hatch. They show him struggling in panic, or damn near panic, with his helmet, and then somehow the bolts fire, and they don't actually come out and say it, but they kind of come out and say it. So here's where Wally Schirra's greatest moment was. Schirra and Grissom were great friends. They were neighbors, actually, for most of the time they spent together in NASA. And after this talk about Grissom basically panicking and blowing the explosive bolts, the actual astronauts, all the Mercury 7 astronauts, all came out real hard in defense of Gus. And again, I'm going off of the Right Stuff movie, and I'm going, well, here's one of the little stories that's in the What We Saw segment. So 3 or 4 flights after Grissom, Wally Schirra flies Sigma 7 orbital flight on an Atlas. And he's so incensed at what the press is saying about Gus that when they get his capsule on the deck of the recovery ship, he's brought up separately by helicopter. The helicopter saves his capsule, puts it on the deck. He's so upset about this that Wally Schirra goes back to his capsule on the deck of the recovery ship, closes the door, locks it, and then fires the explosive bolts on the hatch. And when you do that, when you're inside the hatch and you pull whatever lever or thing you need to do to fire the explosive bolts, there's a kick. And since all of these guys had trained for this, it left a big bruise on your wrist. So and a big red mark, which turned into a big bruise. So Schirra is so pissed off about all of this stuff that he lands on the deck. He's still wet, basically. And he walks over to Sigma 7 while everybody's still congratulating him and cheering and stuff. Pulls himself back into the capsule, closes the hatch, fires the explosive bolts, comes out, it's got this big red mark on his wrist from doing that, and Grissom did not have that mark. Everybody else who had ever done it in training got it, and Schirra knew that. And when Grissom came out of the capsule without that, that was pretty good evidence. So then they found out that the one of the things that was attached to wasn't like obviously the thing that held on the parachute, but one of the exterior attachments was held on by one latch, and they think that this lanyard somehow activated the lever. It's not like a 1,000,000 to 1 explanation, and I was very, very happy to be able to. Well, first of all, change my own mind about what happened there, but also very, very happy to be able to do my small bit on clearing Gus Grissom, who I became much fonder of in the writing of this thing. About the date, yeah. So there are 4 videos and podcasts. By the way, the trailer was in the top 200 on iTunes, and it's not even a show; it's just a trailer. Where was it? I'll just give you one more. I don't want to talk about this all night, but there's something I could use some Stratosphere Lounge advice from. So Grissom has explosive bolts on one capsule, and the presence of the explosive bolts nearly drowns him, nearly dies in the water. And then several years later, he's in a capsule that doesn't have explosive bolts, and he dies in a fire. I learned a lot about that Apollo 1 fire, and I went into a lot of detail on it. And the reason I went on to this detail is because, I'm sorry, people are asking, where can you see it? I will post the links to them as they come out. And they're going to release the first one on Saturday, and then this coming Saturday, and then one every 2 or 3 days, and they release part 4, which is the actual Apollo mission, and everything afterwards. That's going to get released on the actual moon landing date, which is a week from Saturday. But just to give you an idea, when I say the kind of the behind-the-scenes look at these missions, if you're telling the Apollo story and you've got an hour or a 2-hour documentary to do it, almost certainly an hour, because I've seen a bunch of them out there. You talk about the Apollo 1 fire and the tragedy and the setback and the redesign of the capsule and all that stuff. But because I had 4 hours, I had to fill the time, which is why it's not about Apollo 11 at all. It's called Apollo 11, and that's going to be what gets people to watch it. But it's not about Apollo 11. It is about the space race from rocket-assisted Chinese arrows in 200 BC to SpaceX putting 2 boosters down simultaneously on the Falcon Heavy launch. But back to Apollo 1. So I got into some detail about Apollo 1. I started reading it. I put all of this in the show. And it needs to be there, and I'll tell you why. This capsule, the Apollo command module of Block 1, was a pig. The hatch had 3 separate doors that you had to seal. First one, then another, then a third one. Apollos 2 through 6 were they weren't ground tests, Eric. They were unmanned launches of the hardware. This particular capsule, the capsule that they died in, when NASA took delivery of the capsule, there was something like 630 squawks, 630 individual mechanical things that were wrong with that capsule that had to be fixed before they could fly it. I guess it was North American, delivered it after having had to fix another 168 of these things before they could even get it out the factory. Grissom got so disgusted with all of the changes that had to be made to the capsule in order to get it flight worthy. Those changes then had to be reflected in the simulator. So what he's got in the simulator is not what he's going to fly. And since this is changing virtually every day, sometimes a couple times a day, Gus Grissom goes home and goes out in back of his yard and picks a lemon off of his lemon tree and strings it through a coat hanger and hangs it on the door of the simulator. And I'd never seen that picture before. I had no idea the picture existed. The editor at Daily Wire found it and it was fantastic. So they knew that this thing was in trouble. There's a picture of the Apollo 1 crew. They're all gathered around a command module picture because that's basically what they were going to test in orbit, command and service module. And it's your typical smiley picture of the three-man crew. And then they took a gag picture, which is recorded. I'm going to find that. It's worth it. Give me 1 second, because like I say, it's not Stratosphere Lounge without dead air. It's worth seeing. Yeah, here it is. Hang on a second. So they took a picture. They basically took this. Hang on. Don't give me any grief, you miserable bastards. Behave yourself. Okay. So basically they went in to take a mission picture and they took this. Come on. It's worth it, believe me. All right, it's obviously low res. So that's what they went in to do. But what I also found was this. During that photo session, after the official picture was taken, they took this picture. You can go away. Sorry, I'll just get this going. You get the idea already, but I'll just bring it up a little bit. They took this one. And they took that picture because they were so worried about this capsule and had complained about it for so long that that Gus took the picture and he sent it with a note to the head of the hardware, actually at NASA. I forget his name, but he's the guy's in charge of hardware there. And he writes on the back something like, not that we don't trust you, Jack, but we decided to go over your head on this one. So these guys all knew they had a real problem with that capsule, which makes it 3 times that NASA has had astronauts die in suits aboard their vehicles, and all 3 times NASA knew there was a problem. They didn't do anything about it. So just to wrap up this Apollo 1 thing, then I want some advice from the gangaroos. So the picture just breaks my heart. So this is the kind of detail that I go into. So there's a fire, and you hear these guys struggling, and you can hear them struggling with the straps, and there's garbled communication, and then the last thing they hear is a scream coming over the radio. The guys up in the gantry have gas masks, but they're not firefighting gas masks. They're just simple gas masks designed to protect them against toxic fumes. There's no way they can get to the capsule. Once the capsule starts to catch fire, it blows the inner pressure hull of the capsule apart, and then just jets of flame are coming out of these two access panels. So the capsule's now burning like a Roman candle, and the guys who are thinking about rescuing him can't get close enough to it because of the heat, and they're also very concerned that since this fire is going straight up and directly above them is the solid rocket booster of the escape tower, there's serious concern that this fire is going to light that solid rocket booster, which will pull the capsule off of the Apollo stack and kill everybody in the gantry as well. So the fire finally gets under control. They get it out, and they open the hatch, and the thing is so filled with black smoke they can't see anything, but the lights are on. And Grissom is lying there at the floor of the hatch. People in ground control said that they could see on video Ed White trying to open the hatch, like getting out of his chair. Ed White's seatbelts had been burned through, and he was trying to get. They saw him working the handle. And Chaffee, who was furthest from the door, was just sitting there in his position because during an emergency, Chaffee's job was to stay where he was, to be the guy to communicate with Capcom and not make a move for the exit until they'd gotten open. So here's where it gets. This is why I think this is such a good series. You tell that story, and then you basically say, as I said in this, one of the things that that the three men complained about was that there were so many inflammable materials in the capsule. There was an enormous amount of nylon just doing nothing, hanging here, so just filled with almost cosmetic stuff. And when they got the doors open, it took them an hour to get the guys out of the capsule because the nylon in the capsule had melted and fused them into the capsule. They fused them in place. It's like that scene in Aliens, They can't get them out because they're glued to the inside of the capsule from the nylon that had melted and then cooled. Deke Slayton, who was an Apollo, who was a Mercury 7 astronaut, and obviously that means he's good friends with Gus Grissom, known him for a long time, and since Deke was in charge of the entire astronaut program, he knew all of them very well. And Deke Slayton was there shortly after they opened the door, and he said, I looked down, and I couldn't tell which head belonged to which body. Now, I don't think anybody else is going to be going into the detail like that. And why am I going into that kind of detail? It's not out of some, sick kind of morbid sort of thing. The reason I go into that kind of detail is because people need to know that this is the danger that these men faced, and they knew it. This is the reason I go into this detail. They all knew. Being an astronaut was not just fun, and they, Aldrin and Armstrong figured they had a 50-50 chance of coming back from that mission before they flew it. So I went into a lot of detail on how those guys died, and I did it because people need to know the risks they were taking, and certainly that crew knew the risks they were taking, or else they wouldn't have taken that picture of them all praying.